Welcome aboard! We will be your guides during this magical journey into the movies. It's the perfect job for us because we love the movies. It's showtime! Ready when you are, CB.
Action!
Welcome to Monoreel Radio episode number 298. I'm Sean.
And I'm Jackie.
And we are joined this week by a very special guest. If you are a fan of Disney parks, if you love going to the boathouse for brunch like everybody does, you know him well. Piano Rob, thank you so much for joining us this week on Monoreel Radio.
Thank you for having me.
So before we get started talking about the film, I do have a confession to make to Rob. So we had lunch or brunch at the boathouse. I believe it was 2020. We came down for a really short weekend in October.
Yes.
Once the parks opened back up. And I had seen you on TikTok, but TikTok wasn't really like such a big thing yet. And I wasn't following you on other accounts on social media. So I'm at the boathouse and I'm like, I think that's the guy from TikTok. I think he sang that awesome inebriation song that I found so hilarious because that's how I found you. And I was like, I think that's him. And I really wasn't sure. And then sure enough, after the fact, I totally chickened out of coming up to ask you. And then after the fact, I found your other accounts on social media and you started posting your schedule. And I was like, man, I should have just gone up and asked. And then you totally blew up on TikTok. And now you can't get near you at the boathouse. Next time we were there after that, it was around Christmas time with your parents.
Yeah.
And there was no getting anywhere near that piano. But I never got to tell you, you did such an amazing cover of Bed of Roses. I'm the biggest Bon Jovi fan, and that's not a compliment that I dish out lightly, saying that anybody does a good Bon Jovi cover. And you just slayed it. It was awesome. I enjoyed it so much.
I love me some Bon Jovi. I have a couple of fans who are Bon Jovi fans that actually joke. They call me Rob Jovi whenever I do a Bon Jovi song. But that's awesome. Thank you.
Oh, I might be calling you Rob Jovi now, too. This is going to stick for me. I can tell you that.
But, yeah, we are here today to discuss The Boys, the documentary on Richard and Bob Sherman, as we are celebrating the 60th anniversary of Mary Poppins. So, like, everything sort of just came together so perfectly with the timing, and I think that's why we immediately wanted to reach out to you, because you, and I'll tell you a story as well. So the aforementioned brunch that we went to with my parents, and my father is a huge Mary Poppins fan. He's 71 years old, so he has fond memories from the original release of the film. And as we were leaving, we were cutting through the shop, and you were playing Let's Go Fly a Kite. And my father stopped, and he was so taken by listening to you perform that live because it unlocked a core memory for him. But I think at that moment we knew, like, when we eventually do this, for all of the reasons we've mentioned, you were the natural choice. So you're a fixture over at the Boathouse if you're a Disney Parks local. Where did your love for Disney come? Was it a love for Disney that intertwined with music, or were you a musician that fell in love with Disney?
They were. I don't remember a time where either wasn't a part of my life. My grandmother was a piano teacher, so she started teaching me from 5 years old. I didn't even think of it as lessons. It was just kind of something we did. The piano was there, we played it. And Disney, I mean, starting at 5 years old, we were coming down for the vacation every year, or every other year was the most we ever skipped. So we had the coloring books, we had the VHS tapes with the Dirty Little Mermaid cover. Like, we had everything. I don't remember a time when there was no Disney. So it's been forever, my whole life.
And then you were a cast member at one point. Well, you are now, but you were college program and then CM? Is
yes,
that correct?
College program, 2005 at the Backlot Tour. Rest in peace. I love you. I miss you.
Oh, that's my favorite.
Yeah, I did a college program. I stayed on for about part-time or seasonal for 4 years until the ride went bye-bye. And then that was it. That was it for a while.
Wow. And I thought I had my heart broken by the Great Movie Ride and the Backlot Tour being taken away. That's rough. That's really rough.
But you know what? There's going to be a lot more construction walls coming up at Hollywood Studios, as we learned a couple of weeks ago at D23. But let's move on and get into talking about this documentary here. Did it highlight all of the things that we expected it to? Did it take us by surprise? That, on top of many other things, is what we are here to discuss today.
This episode is sponsored by Fierce Fox Co., designers of handmade silkscreen shirts. Fierce Fox has a t-shirt, tank top, hoodie, or crew neck for every fandom. So whether it's the movies or theme parks, princesses or villains, the MCU or Star Wars, everyone will find something they love. The designs range from subtle quotes from our favorite films to iconic characters we can wear proudly in so many different styles, such as sketchbook and concert tees. Listeners of Monoreel Radio can get a 20% discount using the code Monoreel at checkout. Visit fiercefoxco.com to check out all of the collections.
There is a lot that happens in the first 5 minutes of this movie. The first 5 minutes of this documentary may as well have been the trailer for the film. And I don't say that about most movies. There is this roller coaster. They start with them accepting an Academy Award for Chim Chimery, which is not the song that you would have assumed that they would have won an Oscar for, but so many of those songs for Mary Poppins are timeless. And they hit you with all of their timeless music, and then it's a facade for 50 years. Like, I've never experienced 5 minutes of film like this before.
Yeah, roller coaster is the perfect way to put it. Rob, you had said you didn't see this documentary until you watched it to prep for the show, but did you know that this was their relationship before you saw it? Did we ruin everything for you, I guess is what I'm asking.
You ruined everything for me. No, I had no idea. I was so happy. I was gonna tell you, by the way, thank you for doing this, because I needed, not that I needed a reason, but it gave me a reason to watch this. I didn't realize that I let this go by the wayside for so long. It's what is it, 2011, I think? It's
09, actually. It's 15
09?
years old.
It was,
Yeah.
but it wasn't that widely accessible until they put it on Disney Plus, because Disney didn't produce this. This was produced by the Sons, the Sherman
Sons.
Brothers Sons, and I think I want to say they took it to like Tribeca or something. I feel like that's how most of them do it. Like Don Hahn did it with Waking Sleeping Beauty. And
then
until
with Howard,
Disney
too,
Plus,
yeah.
like you really didn't know where to find it.
Well, and when it was funny, like when you first said you want to review, you just said you want to review The Boys with us, and I was like with Homelander and the superheroes. That's what you're doing now? And then I was like, this got to be. And I'm like, oh, I forgot about this, and I was like, well, yes, let's go. But I had no idea their relationship was so bad. I hadn't a clue.
I don't think anybody did.
No.
I think that they did such a good job of that facade, and I think, because we watched it last night, Saving Mr. Banks, you don't get the feeling in that film. I think it's very much a Disney-fied version of the Sherman Brothers. It's what we all assumed that they were. This, like, super engaging, light, working family relationship. You never caught that there was any friction between them. And so, like, immediately, I remember the first time we watched this, and that beat hits where they said, we put on a facade for 50 years. I went, oh, wait a minute. This is not what we expect this to be.
Well, I think that's what I'm so confounded by. And I'm hoping, like, as we're talking through this, like, I can sort of get my finger on the pulse of what it was, because it doesn't seem like there was any one aspect that drove them apart. And they were obviously able to put these feelings aside and create this music. And there still seems to be a mutual respect for each other, for the creative process. Like, they never got to a point where they couldn't be in the same room and couldn't stand to do the work. So the whole time I'm watching, every time I watch this, I'm just like, where's the part where you're like, but he's my brother and I'm going to overlook this? And like, you never get that from it.
But they were always there for each other's big moments. Like, we're probably going to jump around, I'm sure, but like there's that one point where Richard goes to help him move out of his house for a couple of days. Like, he leaves to get his clothes. He's like, of course I'm going to do it. It's my brother. And it's like, and I'm like, but you can't even stand to be in the same room with each other. Like, I don't like, it's just so funny where that blood is so thick. Like, of course I'm going to do this. And then there's, we don't say hi to each other at family gatherings anymore. Like, our family stay. I'm like, what is going on here?
Yeah, well, the cousins, they say that they lived 7 blocks away from each other and had virtually no communication. after the age of 5 or 6, they never really saw each other again.
Yeah, it was about 40 years that had gone by. And any of the family that gets interviewed throughout is like, that's just kind of how it was. There was no rhyme or reason for it, and you didn't ask questions. It's wild. I think, not to your point, not to jump around too much, but the one line that stuck out to me was when they get the Alan Menken interview. And he says, I mean, I couldn't work with any of my siblings. And I thought about that, and I was like, you know what? Like, that's true. For as many similarities as I have with my brother, and as much as we get along great, I do think we would kill each other if we had to work together, because in that sense, we are very, very different people. But I guess, you know, my brother and I are not composing songs like this. Like, I feel like you have to recognize that, like, you're doing something so amazing. And I don't think any of it was lost on them. Like, how do you not bury the hatchet for the greater good?
And they obviously know they couldn't do it without the other one. Like, I mean, even like Alan Menken, like you said, he doesn't write his lyrics. He has a lyricist, you know, he writes fantastic. These guys, Richard was not going to come up with the poetic ways and the crazy phrases and the things that Robert came up with. So it's this really, it's interesting that you can't be like, well, we know we need each other. Like, they could be cordial. I mean, I guess they kind of were cordial, but it was still crazy to me that they didn't see each other socially at all for those years there for a time.
What's also really interesting, I like how, you know, as the documentary gets rolling and after they've exposed that, you know, they don't get along, they're cutting back and forth between Beverly Hills and London. You know, and that was something when Bob moved, it was much later in life. It was after his wife had passed. And I think that was where he needed to just like leave everything behind. But it's interesting that that wasn't even something that put them at odds with each other, where one had like gone Hollywood, so to speak, and the other was more reserved and didn't want the spotlight. It wasn't even like a Walt and Roy relationship where one of them is more business minded and one is more creative. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and I like how it cuts back and forth. And then they get into how it all started, where they had Alley Studios, you know, in their backyard. And I would have thought that this is where the sibling rivalry starts, and then you kind of grow out of it. But it seems like it was the reverse, where it was good in the beginning, and then they just grew further and further apart.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I feel. It was good. And I don't know, it's like they always talk about having different friends, stuff like that. As they were growing up, they started not having the same interests. Like, I mean, I guess that happens. My kids are like 18 months apart. They're two boys. So I think of that, like, there's times they're best friends and there are times they are going to just say whatever they can to rile each other up. And I guess I'm assuming it's the same with any siblings. Must have been like that with them.
Yeah, I can confirm that. My brother and I are 2 years apart from each other, and there were moments where, you know, everything was fine, and then there were moments where it's like you're strangling each other. Like, that's how it is, especially when you're an adolescent. It's wild because, like, the thing that I keep kind of coming back to, and I'm going to come back to it a lot over the course of this conversation, but, like, as I'm thinking through it here, as we're talking through all of this, starting as kids, you're right, like, it seemed like they had the mutual interest and but they separated because they were so different personally. But when it came to the creative, they would come back together, but one needed the other. It's like the line in Deadpool, like, your crazy balances my crazy, or your crazy matches my crazy, you know, where it's like they truly were a pair that one needed the other. And it seems like it was always like that, in spite of the fact that they were always so different.
I think that also comes from, they were technically a showbiz family. You know, their parents immigrated here from Kiev. They end up in the Bronx. The father's a composer. He marries an actress. So I kind of feel like they were at least cognizant of, this is what we need to do to make a living in this industry. And that's probably why they could at least acknowledge they were two sides of the same coin, and that they were able to at least sit down together to get the work done. But I think a lot of the issues also and maybe they didn't want to dive too much into it in the documentary. I'm wondering how much of that is influenced by it's their sons putting it together and they're trying to be respectful. I think that Bob, it seems at least, had a lot of unresolved issues after he had to go to war. And I think that maybe Richard didn't understand. I mean, nobody's going to understand what you went through, what you saw, what you had to do. And I think that Bob always seemed like he had sort of a chip on his shoulder that his brother wasn't trying to relate to him.
I'll even take it, I think, a step further. That generation of man was probably even taught to not talk. You don't talk about it. And there's things a man does and you bury these feelings. And it, like, because there's one point, I know Richard says, I don't think he wanted to talk about it. And maybe he didn't. What was he taught that way? But he definitely had demons from that war that he never, ever got over. And I don't know if anybody was going to understand that.
For sure. And then they sort of double down on it because Richard did go into the military, but then he started playing with the band, so he never had to go fight, and that seems like a really big point of contention.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, did you hear that little snark in Robert's voice? He started playing with the band. It's like I was like, all right, I caught that. I caught what you said there.
Yeah, and he was like, he never killed anybody. Like, point blank, never killed anybody. Not even like he never picked up a gun. Like, he didn't shy away from it at all.
And frankly, that's something that I really like about this documentary is, and perhaps it's because it wasn't funded and backed by Disney specifically. Had this been a Disney documentary, this would have been very different. I think the fact that this came from the family, and they were, I mean, unless the Shermans didn't want to discuss it, this is a completely uncensored open book. Moments like that stand out. Moments that you would think that Disney would kind of brush under the rug. And I think that it showed some real emotion because multiple times throughout the documentary, both of them either get choked up or say, I don't want to talk about it. I'm not going to speak on this. So there's still sort of like a respect there for the other because you could tell that they go just far enough without saying too much about the other person because there's still a respect there. And I think that a lot of that does come from the fact that this was very much a family affair. And what really struck me when you talk about musical families, they're not the Jacksons, they're not the Wilsons, right? In that they had parents that were supportive to a point, or too enthusiastic and they pushed them too far, right? Like we just talked about at the Beach Boys documentary. Like in this case, the parents would just stand in the back of the garage, let them do their thing. They let them paint the studio on the garage door, never questioned it, never made them paint over it. Like they were completely and utterly supportive in everything that these boys wanted to do.
I am going to respectfully disagree with you on not pushing them together, though, because after college, they did fund an apartment for the two of them. And the dad sort of knew that by forcing them to work together, they were going to create really great songs. So I don't know that it was so much, him being like a stage parent, but I think he saw the talent. I think he recognized what his sons were capable of. I think he certainly recognized that they needed each other, and he just kind of had to push them towards that.
And but it didn't sound like they were upset about it. Like in some of those other musician families you mentioned, you really saw some fighting, and maybe there was a lot more that they didn't show. But it almost sounded formulamatic, where the dad was just like, "You guys have this like song. Oh, that's a good one. Go take it down to so and so." And then it's like it almost made it sound like it was so easy to just get their careers started in a way.
I agree. I mean, I certainly think that there is a little bit of nepotism there, being that their father was a songwriter. I think he had the connections, and I mean, you're also talking about this is early Hollywood. Like the jobs were readily available. It wasn't nearly as cutthroat as it is now to get your start there. But that's a really good point that you bring up, because Bob was trying to push back and not have to work with his brother. He did form the production company with somebody else, and that was actually kind of one of the things that I enjoyed learning was that they were each writing two different songs, and their first big hit, they sort of merged it together because one had the song and part of the lyrics and it wasn't really working. And then Richard had a really good song and they fused them together. And like, that should be your aha moment, right? Of like, this is perfect. We do have a better working relationship. And to an extent, they did realize that because then they did get rid of Bob's business partner. But even still, like, there's not that acknowledgement of he is my other half. I do need him as a writing partner. It was just like, okay, great. We have a hit on our hands. On to the next.
And neither one of them actually, that's such a good point. Neither one of them said that to the other one.
Yeah.
Like ever. And it's so funny to me because Richard seems shocked that Bob didn't enjoy making music as much, I think is a good way to put it. Like Richard seems like he reminds me of me. He just wants to play every day. He doesn't yeah, sure. I just want to play the piano. And Robert seems like he kind of was like, nah, I want to do other things. Like, but he kind of always kept coming back to it to make a living, I guess. Was coming back to writing lyrics, but I never just see the enjoyment from him. But neither one of them ever is like, well, I had to have the other one to make it. And I'm like, how can you not see? You both needed the other one to make it.
Yeah, and I don't know if that sort of got glossed over because the song in question that I'm talking about is Tall Paul, and it ended up being the first big hit for Annette Funicello. And they focus on, they start calling Annette their lucky star, so they realize what she did for their careers, and this obviously goes on to be a very long working relationship with her. But the focus totally pulls to Annette and not what this song really meant for their relationship and going forward that they were working together until they get to Disney.
And the thing is, I think the line that kind of sums up everything that we're talking about right now, a few minutes prior to that moment in the documentary, they're going back and forth, interviewing the two of them, obviously in separate rooms. And the cut basically is Bob says that they didn't really know each other. Cut to Richard saying that Richard always looked up to Bob. So their relationship to themselves wasn't even clearly defined because they have two different ways that they explain what their relationship was, both personally and professionally. And you're 100% right. I think Bob was the lyricist, but we know that he was always trying to write that great American novel. And Richard later goes on to say, but we're writing songs, isn't this the greatest thing? So they definitely approached it in two different ways, but because they balanced each other out so well that they couldn't help themselves but to make these timeless hits. And I think that one of the other things that happened after Tall Paul was when they went in and they were playing for Walt Disney, and he was like, yeah, that'll work. And they didn't understand what that'll work meant. And they didn't know what a compliment that was. And I think now, all of these years later, hearing how people would talk about what the creative process was with Walt and how sometimes it took some time to reel him in a little bit and kind of get him grounded because he was such the idea man. For him to just say, yep, that'll work, and move on, like, it seems like such an insult, but it is the highest form of compliment that you're going to get from him.
Yeah, he's not going to, make everything totally saccharine and fawn all over you. Like, that'll work is as good as it's going to get with him. What's really remarkable that stood out to me, and I think this is probably one of the most memorable moments of the documentary, is and this is something that they don't get enough credit for, is not just how good they are at songwriting, how good they are at storytelling. Because when Walt gave them the book for Mary Poppins, he didn't have the rights to it yet. We know this. This is not a secret. But
it was to them at the time.
That's true.
Yeah.
He had asked them what they thought and what they could make of it. And when they went back to him, they had 6 chapters underlined, and then Walt gets his copy, and he's got the same 6 chapters. And that gives me, I'm getting chills, like, just saying it. And that's where it's like, this was just such a meant to be partnership, regardless of what was going on with the Shermans, with their relationship. Them being at Disney was like a kismet thing.
Yeah. And I mean, and obviously that was the greatest thing they created. It was one of the earliest things they started creating with Disney. And that's it. Like, that's the best They've made wonderful other things, but that was the best thing.
Oh, it totally is.
Well, it's so funny that you bring that up because you especially hear about musicians, right, that have one-hit wonders because they put everything into that first album, into that first song, and it's a tremendous smash, and then you never hear from them again. And it's not that they were one-hit wonders, but their most successful thing was the first thing that they did for Disney. But if you take everything else that they did after it, comparatively, was it as successful as Mary Poppins? Of course not, but it would be the greatest hit for any other songwriter that Disney would have brought in, and I think that speaks to the brilliance of what they did together.
I think that Ben Stiller, who I have no idea what he's doing in this documentary,
he was a producer, apparently. He had credit.
That's
and because
true,
his dad knew them too, right? That was the thing. Jerry Stiller knew them.
Yes, you are correct. So that's how he found his way here. But he does say when something is so ingrained in the culture, you don't think about the two guys that had to sit down and actually write it. And I mean, for you, Rob, I'm sure you do because you do write music. But for us who are fans of Disney, who know Disney history, who have grown up singing these songs, it's true. You totally take it for granted. Like, I've never been sitting on It's a Small World going, gee, you know, what was the process like for as much as I like learning about behind the scenes and delving into things like that, I've never been on the ride listening to that earworm and been like, you know, somebody actually had to sit and create this. Like, it's just always sort of been there.
I'll tell you what sticks out the most to me, and I'm curious if you noticed this. I don't know if this is just a musician thing. The fact that they were staff musicians at the studio, like that, I am still trying to wrap my head around that, because most musicians, your best case scenario, you're like, you know, when Tobey Maguire was playing Peter Parker and he's like, could I have a job here? He's like, freelance. Like, that's what we do. It's freelance. Nobody pays me like, just come in every week and I'm going to randomly ask you to write a song here or there. And here's your paycheck. And I don't know what would have worked out better for them. Like, I don't know what rights they have to songs, if they got royalties, if their deal is we just get a paycheck at the end of every week and we get raises. Like that whole thing is mind blowing to me, to just be a staff musician for, like, you're Walt Disney's personal musician, like a butler or something, but you're his personal piano player.
Yeah, come in every day at Friday at 5:00 every week, and you know, just play the song, and I'm going to put you on payroll.
Yeah.
No, that's a really great point, though, because it sort of begs the question: if Mary Poppins wasn't a factor, or if he had the rights, would they have gotten that staff job? Because I think a lot of it did come from the fact that they were very much workshopping it in order to get P.L. Travers to sign it over. So I'm wondering if Walt recognized, like, I can't have them go off on another gig for a month or so and pull them back in when I need to be pitching this to her and get the okay, even though she didn't want the music at all whatsoever.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how much of a factor Mary Poppins was in them just being able to have that much work to justify the position.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think he was sort of safeguarding himself. Like, to him, that was $1,000 a week insurance policy. And I think he recognized that they had it. And I think he knew with all of the other projects that they had coming down the pike, because they would do these little one-off things. Like they did The Monkey's Uncle, right? Or they did Tall Paul. And then even with Jungle Book, which came later, they didn't write everything for Jungle Book, but they wrote a little bit for Jungle Book. I think he knew, like, I can keep them working enough where I can justify paying them because it serves me and these other projects I have. But you're right, it protects them from taking something elsewhere, because if they knew he didn't have the rights, I mean, Rob, I'd have to imagine if you found out that you were working on something that could ultimately be a waste of time after 2 or 3 years, that you would have probably considered different avenues.
Well, and you know and I'm curious what was being dangled in front of them. Like, I would love to know, one, what they were getting paid specifically during that time, like just being paid to be on staff. I would love to know specifically what their deals were, because nobody did things like that. Like, was Walt just a genius and he just knew all this, so it's okay that he kind of manipulates people and doesn't give them all the information? Or was he kind of doing it in maybe a not so nice way to kind of use people because he knows what his vision is? Like, yeah, I have all the things you're saying, I was thinking, and we're never going to know the specific answers to that. And obviously it worked out. Richard Sherman seems pretty happy, But yes, I'm so curious and all that. Like, yeah, they didn't have it. They didn't have the stuff. It wouldn't have worked. I would have been like, what are we doing all this for?
No, and I think that's why it was soul crushing for them when he passed, because Walt was the only one who could justify the position. And as soon as he was gone, they were like the first thing to go. Like, yes, they were brought back for other projects, but they weren't on payroll every week anymore. Like, they left Disney. And I think, you know, the way that they speak about it, obviously they were brokenhearted over losing Walt. They were among very few of his colleagues who did get close to Walt, close to Lillian, and did sort of have a social relationship with him outside of work.
But it's such a special thing, because to create what they created almost only comes from just spending that amount of time with somebody. And that doesn't happen nowadays, because like we say, you're paying everybody for their time, for their whatever. You're not just going to be in the same studio for 30 to 40 hours for the week, where it's almost like you're just kind of hanging out. I really feel like they were getting paid to hang out, but because it was so friendly and so creative and probably so unstructured in that sense, that's why they were able to do it. And then all of a sudden Walt dies, and the people that only know how to look at numbers and aren't creative and are looking at this like, we're not going to pay all these people just to hang out if we don't have a goal of what we're doing. And you saw the change that happened after that.
That's exactly it. And maybe in a way, it sort of did do them a favor, because they have to grieve him in their own way. And maybe they did need to take a step back, because I can't even imagine how hard it would be to go into work every day, especially when you're in a creative role and you're brokenhearted and now you have to produce. So maybe taking a little bit of a break from Disney was a good thing, being that Walt was no longer there. The proof is sort of in the pudding, because they did have another huge hit on their hands with Chitty Chitty Bang Bang at this point. That is one of like their biggest musicals, and you don't get that if you are tied into a Disney contract. And then they later did go back to Disney for Aristocats and Bedknobs and Broomsticks, but they said it wasn't the same.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like, essentially, his death should have been the death blow to them. And it wasn't. And I think that a lot of factors play into this. And I'm interested in getting your take on this, Rob. Something that they said earlier when they were doing the writing for Mary Poppins, and it's something that you and I have spoken about on the show, not so much when it comes to music, but when it comes to dialogue and to plot. They never wrote down to children. They never looked at themselves as writing kiddie songs. As I think Bob had said, we made music that kiddies listened to, but they would take proper grammar, big words, and it taught kids to use those words, and then they would kind of make them, fantastical with their own, supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, right? But they were like, we did that so that the kids learned the word precocious. Yeah, like, how important is it for you as a creator yourself? How much of that goes into your mind when you're creating a piece and trying to not write down to kids or not completely pander to an audience so that it has a universal appeal?
It depends on the project. I think that's the best way to say it. Like, if I'm writing a song, generally I'm just writing for me first, really, because if I'm not writing for me, then you're trying to write something that's canned, and I couldn't do that. But I also have times where I'm trying to write. Like, I love writing the comedy songs that we do on WW News Tonight. Like, I like coming up with that stuff, but that's a totally different thing. Like, in that case, I am thinking, well, what's going to be funny? What's funny to me? What's funny to the average viewer? But for them, I think the importance of with what they were writing, it was movies that families were going to enjoy. It wasn't movies. It's not something on like a Disney Junior. You're not writing, a hot dog that you're putting a 3-year-old in front of the TV and you don't want him to move. Like, I think they say it with Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. Grown men are crying in the audience because you're writing stuff that children can enjoy, but you're also writing stuff that really touches the adults. And when you find that magic middle, that's what's important. So I think for that reason, they could do anything in writing family songs for movies.
And the thing with Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, because it was Albert Broccoli who had done all the James Bond movies, because I remember the first time we saw this, and I saw Barbara Broccoli. Why did they get her? Because they did James. I had no idea that they had done Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. But I think the reason why that work is so good is because, Walt Disney did kind of take the restrictor plate off of them in many ways, but they were writing to a certain audience there, and they were writing to a certain tone. The fact that Chitty Chitty Bang Bang is a dark movie, people forget how dark that movie is. And especially for somebody like Bob, who was the darker of the two, for him to really be able to experiment with his lyrics and his storytelling, it let them go to a place, and I think at a time where they were emotionally in a darker place, Disney very coldly cut ties with them. Did you turn in your time cards this week? It was like never what you would have experienced if Walt had been alive. So I think it took them the heartbreak of losing him, the heartbreak of losing that job, and the way that they went out. I think it put them in the right place to really kind of spread their wings and write some of their best work.
And I think that's evidenced too by, I had no idea that Pink Floyd did a cover of one of the Chitty Chitty Bang Bang songs. And that's not something that you see often, where mainstream artists are covering their catalog unless they're doing something like specifically for Disney, or if they're, playing Orlando or something like that. You don't see it too often, especially not with a band like that.
And what stood out to me is how much they enjoyed working on Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. They said everything they wrote was just loved, and they were just getting praised and praised. And that must have been such a different than coming from the Walt Disney Studio, where you're getting that'll work. Like it's also understood people need to hear and feel praised differently. And when you know what they want, it sounded like they really needed that verbal, you guys are amazing. And it came at a very important time, like we were saying, for them.
Especially coming from that working relationship with Walt, they knew what he wanted. Even though maybe he didn't give out the praise as much as they needed to hear it, they would know they did right by him. They would know that they gave him what he wanted. And maybe because they were just completely cut loose, they sort of needed that shot in the arm to be like, okay, we still got this. We can still do this, even though Walt is not there guiding us.
And the crazy thing is, while this is going on, their relationship is getting worse and worse and worse. The fracture is getting wider and wider and wider.
Sean, would you say it's getting chittier and chittier, their relationship?
It is it's very chitty. They had a very chitty relationship at this point in time.
I'm glad you bring that up, though, because I think that, their parents did live to see a lot of their career, a lot of the accolades. But this is also a really important turning point because their father was one of the people that kept them together. Walt was one of the people that kept them together. Even their lawyer, I believe, was sort of a mediator in their lives. So now all of these people are gone. And I think that's why, because there's nobody encouraging them to keep working together, or at least, okay, maybe you guys, after how many years, it's got to be like 30 or 40 years at this point. Nobody's saying, okay, why don't you take a break from your collaborations and start having a social relationship outside and see where this goes besides your work. And maybe that would have been what it took to repair them.
It may have been. The thing that really struck me is after the death of their parents, right? In the early 70s, where we're going to have two receptions, because they're going to sit Shiva, right? So we're going to have two receptions. You either go to this one or you go to that one. You don't go to one and then the other. Pick a side. I mean, even in that moment, pick a side. And when they talk about it in the documentary, you can see that the pain was there for both of them. They had so many years that were lost. I mean, I'd venture a guess to say that they had just as much time separate from each other as they did collaborating together. And they never really address it, but I do wonder to a point if there was any regret there at the end for either one of them as to how things went and why. Because there was always, though, like a very deep respect for each other, even though they picked very funny times to show that respect to each other.
Even with their childhood home, you're right, because it seemed like Bob had the home in the family until he went to London. And then after his passing, they bring Richard back. So it's still, to my understanding, it still seems like it's in the family. Maybe the son lives there now, but Richard's not come back. He said in like 40 years since he was a child. So that's just, and one of the, I think one of the daughter-in-laws, she does say what's normal to us is weird to other people. But like, yeah, that is kind of weird that you've not been back to visit your childhood home when it's still in your family.
But you know what's funny? That I think right there is what families are. And that's what generational trauma ends up becoming is you don't know what's normal as a child. You just know your environment and this is what it is. So if you grow up with, well, this is just the way things are because we're taught different ways to deal with our family. Like I have family members who hate each other, but they have to go to the same thing. Whereas like now that I've been down here for 20 years, I see my immediate family is close by, my parents, my sister, but like my mom's one of 10 kids. My dad's got a huge extended family. I can't keep up with everybody all the time. And I don't think anybody takes offense to it because how much of you are you going to give of yourself where you're not enjoying your own life or creating your own things and stuff like that? So whatever happened in their family, like maybe it was bad that he didn't want to go visit that house. Like whatever happened, as long as that person handled it in a healthy way, I think it's good. But at this point just in society, I don't know if people knew how to handle those things in a healthy way. So it's up to each of those individuals if they did or didn't. And we're never going to know all those specifics.
That's true. That's a really great point. And I think, really the last people to try, the sons are really the ones that tried to pull the Hail Mary, knowing that they were going to do the premiere of Mary Poppins, the stage play. And, you don't want to be cold about it, but I think that, they were acknowledging the mortality. You have to, it's a part of life. And they wanted to try one last time to, especially when when his health was really declining, they really wanted to try one more time to have them bury the hatchet. And then while this is going on, they do cut it against Richard reading the 50th birthday gift that Bob got him. And it's this beautiful little plaque. And he wrote him such an emotional and heartfelt note. And Richard's sitting there crying as he's reading it. And it's like, what gives, guys? Like, clearly you're still both upset by this. Like, where is the conversation to move past this at this point? It doesn't seem like it was ever really had.
I agree. I mean, I don't know what it would have taken. Like, is he crying for lost time? Is he crying for some nostalgia that he thought he should have feel? Because a lot of times as people, we think we're supposed to feel a thing that we don't, and then we don't know how to feel about it. Like, I can only imagine the rush of emotions, like, and only he knows. And like we said, they talked about a lot, but they definitely didn't talk about everything. And I don't think they ever were going to. I think there were things that they just felt they weren't going to talk about.
I wonder how much that does come from the filmmakers, though, and just trying to be respectful of not only their fathers, but I kind of think the thing that's also not being said, and we kind of did skip over this, I'm wondering how much they're trying to be respectful of their mothers as well. Because, Rob, you had brought up the point before where Bob went to help Richard move out of his apartment, and Richard said, "I owe you one." The IOU came in the form of, at one point, Bob did want to hang it all up. But the wild thing to me is that it wasn't that Bob was like, "I need a break from you. I'm going to go off. I'm going to write on my own. I'm going to take a break with my family, go on a really long trip or whatever." No, he asked Richard to help him pack. And then he just left for a couple of days and nobody heard from him. So you still turned to your brother in your time of need. And it wasn't necessarily him that he was taking a break from. I think it was everything, that's for sure. But he didn't ask his wife. He asked his brother. And it seemed like his wife had a big problem with that. And that might be where part of the rift escalated.
Well, they said that was basically that was the end right there. That was really where it cemented that we are going to our relationship is that of a business, and after that everything is completely separated. And it seemed like there was a lot of opportunity for sides to forgive the other, and it just never happened. But it's so funny that, like, he has this moment, like you said, he has this moment where he's breaking down, reading the plaque. Rob, you said, is it because of the lost time? Is it the regret? And then on the other hand, you know, moments, I don't remember if it was moments earlier or later, but it was right around the same time that happened. They're talking about Beverly Hills Cop 3, and they're talking about their cameos. And when, I think it was John Landis, right, asked Bob, what do you like? He's like, I like that you cut Richard out. And it's like, but
funny. It's such a brother thing.
It's such a brother thing. But maybe he's just deadpan and dry, but it didn't, you couldn't tell, like, is it tongue in cheek, or is it kind of like a, yeah, I got the speaking line, you didn't. I don't know. But it's what I think this documentary does very well throughout is that they strike such a balance between the two of them. There are moments where I wondered, watching, okay, by the end, whose side am I going to take? They do a really good job of leading you to think that you're going to take one side over the other. And it's like, okay, now I'm going to side with Bob. Okay, now I'm going to side with Richard. But by the time you get to the end of the film, it's like, I can't take anybody's side, because I think that you're both right, and I think you're both justified in everything that you went through. Maybe there was miscommunication. Maybe you just needed to get away from each other. I don't know what it was, but at the end of it, you never end up picking a side, because there's no side to take. And it's rare in a film that you don't have, you know, for not that any of them are bad, but, you know, to break it down in the most simple of terms, the good guy and the bad guy. There is no bad guy. It's just two good guys. It's two very complicated good guys at the end of the day.
Two different guys.
Yeah.
Which it really is all. And I had a similar struggle. I mean, one's named Rob and one plays piano. Like, it's hard to pick which one. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, they're both right. They're both right, and they're both wonderful. It's so there was no, I didn't find myself leaning one way or the other. I'm just thankful they were able to make what they made for the rest of us.
It's true. Yeah, I think this is like a classic example of there's three sides to every story: yours, mine, and the truth. I think, you know, it does lie somewhere in the middle of both sides of it.
I think so. But I think, you know, by the time you get to the end of the film, and by the time you get to the reunion at the end, which was kind of a tough watch.
Yeah.
It was a tough watch for a lot of reasons at the Mary Poppins Broadway, right? The premiere that night, because you can tell that the two of them had not seen each other for a considerable amount of time. Bob was obviously in very poor physical health, whereas Richard wasn't. And I do think a lot of that probably had to do with the injury he sustained at the war. Mm-hmm. But you could tell where they're standing almost next to each other on the carpet, and the whole time I'm thinking they're bringing them in together. And as you know, you see it's right there on video where Richard has to go tap him on the shoulder and go, "Hey kid, how are you?" You know, like they were standing right next to each other, and it seemed like they didn't even know that the other was there at first.
And that's one of those things, you know, the second time through that I was watching it, I was trying to take note of, because you do see them shake hands a lot throughout, you know, all of these archival clips that they're playing. So, and then there's that moment at the end, like you said, where it's, "Hey bro, was this an olive branch or was this part of the facade?" And I actually kind of like that they're ending it on that ambiguous note of, we're never going to know.
I agree. I agree with that. And you never know what somebody's really thinking. And I think at the end of the day, that's what it comes down to. And even though they're brothers, like, I'm sure we have people in our lives you could talk to for 3 hours on the phone and not get tired. And then there's probably somebody very close to you because they're a family member, family friend that you've had in your life that you're like, you're just on a high and by basis. How's the weather? You don't have anything else in common with that person. It's a shame that they're brothers. And I guess they don't even like to reminisce about the stuff that they did. Like, I feel like I'd reminisce about all the great stuff we did together, but they don't even do that.
Yeah.
I think that they appreciated the things that they contributed, but you're right. They don't have, there's, other than that red carpet moment on Broadway and archival footage, they're never in the same room at the same time. They're not even in the same country at the same time.
We don't even know if Richard went to the funeral.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume that he did, but we don't know because obviously they don't cover that in the documentary, but
and that's fine though.
Yeah.
You know, that's a family thing. Like, I respect that. I don't necessarily need an answer.
But,
Yeah.
you know, I guess at the end of it, it's, you know, goes back to that question of what did we think of the documentary and did it take us by surprise? I'll let our guest go first.
Absolutely, it took me by surprise because I have been a Disney fan. I'm well aware of the Sherman Brothers. I did not know everything we've discussed. I did not know that rift between them. It still kind of melts my brain a little, but I also know at this point in my life, I'm comfortable saying people have their own relationships, and I guess this was theirs. Like, to comment on it, I forgot who it was in the film that said it. Someone said, though, the closest thing they can compare their relationship writing-wise was to Paul McCartney and John Lennon.
McCartney, yeah.
And that was a beautiful way to put it because those guys are very different personalities, and look what they created together. So I think it just goes to show you, I mean, you need a yin and a yang. The Disney company has proven that many times. Walton Roy, Michael Eisner, and Frank Wells. We keep seeing it. It's a common theme in this company. So why should the Sherman Brothers be any different? That friction created some of the best things we've ever heard to date.
Yeah, I think that that is the perfect comparison, and anybody that has listened to the Beatles or listened to their solo work after, I'm going to use the best example because you and I fight about this every year on Christmas, and I want Rob's answer as well. Every year on Christmas, it is a debate as to who had the better Christmas song. I will die on the hill that it's Paul McCartney, but you swear it's John Lennon.
It's Lennon.
No, it's McCartney.
Well, this is going to be the definitive answer.
So this is going to be a very interesting little tidbit. But so for two of the best songwriters of all time, I am very sad with both of those Christmas songs, to be honest with you. I think the John Lennon one is written better. I can't stand that Yoko is singing on it. That's my downfall for that.
I'll give you that one.
The Paul McCartney one, for him, I don't think it's good. Simply having I just don't. And it's so fun. I love Christmas music. It's so funny we're having this talk, but so I don't even know which one to pick in that way because I think John's is slightly a better song, but I hate the Yoko singing. And Paul, he's just so much better than that.
But those two songs, you're writing for Christmas. Listen to one, listen to the next. They couldn't be more different.
Oh, no.
And
Yeah.
so that is the perfect. I feel like if you had taken Richard and Bob and put them in different rooms and said, write a song for the holidays, those are the two tones that you would have gotten. So it is a perfect comparison.
Yeah. One's just going to be happy they're hanging with the family and it's Christmas time, and the other one's going to be like, let's get some world peace here, people. There's a lot of crap going on in the world. Like,
exactly.
It is funny.
Well, I think those are sort of my final thoughts because I just do feel like so much of it is unresolved, but I think that that's a good way to sort of like make it make sense in my brain is that they're not coming back to each other for a paycheck like collaborators who don't necessarily get along. And I'm not saying that that's always the case with Lennon and McCartney, but I'm just saying there are so many people who can make music together and can stand the other person because they're being paid well to do so. And the Shermans never acknowledge that it was for a paycheck. And I'm not saying that that's what it was, but they have a better reason for coming back together than anyone else who's just collaborating because they're under contract together. They're brothers, and that's what you never get out of it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at like David Lee Roth and Eddie Van Halen. They hated each other at times. They couldn't even be on the same They couldn't be in the same hotel. They couldn't be on the same plane. They wouldn't ride in the same bus. I think when they had their reunion tour back in like 07 or 08, whenever it was, their agreement was, I'll see you on stage, and that's it. But that's what they made work. But they made some of the best rock songs of all time. Like, together, they were a powerhouse. Outside of a studio, don't get them together. And you don't get that feeling from the Shermans here. Yeah, I think this documentary, it took me by surprise when we watched it the first time. Sitting back and watching it again this week in preparation for the show, it took me aback again because I had sort of forgotten how dark it was. Not in a bad way. I like the fact that it is as dark as it is. I think that telling this story is important, not having it told specifically by Disney. I think that regardless of who made the film, their contribution to Disney is their contribution to Disney. I think the fact that they wrote such incredible music and such happy music when they, in their partnership, were not terribly happy. But they found happiness somewhere that they gave to the world. I think that that's an incredible story. I'd honestly like to see this turned into a biopic.
Yes.
I don't want Disney to make it because I think that they're going to gloss over a lot. If the family were to put it together, I think that would be spectacular. But I think that they're so complex that they are a story that is worth explaining and it's worth telling. And it might be something that we get down the road. I'm not all that sure.
I would 1,000% cast Jason Schwartzman and BJ Novak again.
I'm curious if there's any more information out there for the story. I know there's more to the story. I just don't know if anybody else has even that information because so much was not spoke about. I agree with you. Disney shouldn't make it because, like, same thing with Saving Mr. Banks, great movie, but you know they're going to paint themselves in the proper light as well. And I would rather get the truth, and I think the truth is more useful. You learn more from the truth than some polished up version.
Yeah, I have always died on the hill of if we're going to do a biopic, I mean, yes, at the end of the day, it's entertainment, and maybe you want to paint some things to be prettier than they were. But if you decided to make a biopic, it's because you thought the story as it stood in reality was interesting enough to tell that story. It does kind of drive me nuts when somebody says, we're making a biopic, and they completely change everything. Because it's like, no, so you basically just took a name and you made it what you wanted it to be. And hid behind this is the great story we're going to tell. Like Miracle does it very well. Miracle does it maybe the best of anything that we've seen. Certainly anything we've reviewed on this show. But Rob, thank you so much for joining us in this conversation. Let our friends know out there where they can find you in the parks, where they can find you on the socials.
Okay. Social media, I'm pretty much piano_Rob on everything. YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. I have a Facebook page. Just type my name in there. I'm sure you'll find it. I'm at Boathouse most weekends. My company, we have 2 shows Friday and Saturday night, and then another 2 Saturday, Sunday brunches. So there's always somebody there if it's not me. I'm at Rose and Crown at Epcot occasionally. I'm at Pat O'Brien's at Universal occasionally. And on YouTube, Thursday nights, WDW News Tonight. So a couple of places you could see me. And
you're a big Horror Nights guy. I've seen on your social.
I am pumped for Horror Nights. That is my season. I can't wait.
Yeah, we did get Rush of Fear passes.
So we're going to have to stop into Pat's one night.
Yeah, we've got at least 3 to 4 dates in the month of September that we know that we're going to be going to Horror Nights. So we will absolutely, if we don't see you at Horror Nights, then we'll definitely see you at Pat O'Brien's. But again, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate that you came on with us today. And we invite you back anytime you'd like to come and discuss any of the films that you love.
Anytime. This was so much fun. Thank you, guys.
You got it. We're interested in hearing what you have to say about The Boys. You can join the conversation on social media, on all major platforms at Monoreel Radio, or you can shoot us an email, monoreelradio@gmail.com. News of the Week is coming up, but first, a quick break.
News of the Week is proudly sponsored by KMV Travel. KMV Travel is a boutique travel agency that helps families plan personalized vacations and create unforgettable memories in the happiest place on earth. If you've dreamed of visiting Waltz Park or racing with Lightning McQueen in Cars Land, a KMV Travel specialist will work with you to customize the perfect getaway for you and your family. Your KMV travel advisor will ensure you know the ins and outs of the My Disneyland app, assist with dining reservations, and of course, share their favorite hacks so you can get the most out of your vacation. Visit kmvtravel.com to soar over to California now.
If you're thinking of booking a trip to a Disney destination, you have to contact Jackie Zalezzi. My husband and I recently celebrated our 10-year wedding anniversary and wanted to go on a trip, just the two of us. Jackie suggested Disneyland, knowing we'd never been and I had been dreaming of going. I am so thankful for her suggestion, as it was the most magical way to celebrate. Jackie got us a fantastic deal, but still constantly checked for discounts to make sure we were guaranteed the lowest price. Having recently visited Disneyland, she was a great source for helpful information and had suggestions for everything, including meals, Max Pass, even places to visit in Los Angeles on our non-park day. Upon arrival at our hotel, we experienced the easiest check-in because Jackie had taken care of everything. Throughout our trip, Jackie was in constant contact, making sure we had everything we needed and answering any questions we had. Our vacation was perfect.
Exciting Disney Cruise Line news this week.
Yeah, and it keeps on coming even after everything that they announced with D23.
Yeah, I'm sort of surprised that they didn't just announce everything at D23 and why. I mean, I guess, listen, as a Disney fan, it's fun that you continue to get a surprise every week, but I'm surprised specifically about one of these items that they didn't announce it and show it off there.
Right.
But we have the Disney Destiny, some important dates here. Its maiden voyage out of Fort Lauderdale will be on November 20th, 2025, which means the booking window for that cruise will start on September 12th of this year. We also got a first view at the new Pirates-inspired pub on the ship. This is what I'm surprised about. First off, it looks great.
Yeah, this is what I'm here for.
I'm super excited for this. I'm hoping that what we get in Magic Kingdom is very similar to this. I'm surprised because we do have a Pirates restaurant coming to Magic Kingdom and because we have artwork here, that this was not revealed at the D23 Expo.
Well, I think the focus was more on the Pirates Lounge at D23 that's coming to Magic Kingdom. So in a way, I'm glad that they held this because it gives us even more to get excited about. It's smart the way that they're releasing everything in stages. You know, the artwork looks pretty cool. It's kind of what I was expecting, but I really like that they leaned into the captain's quarters here because I feel like what they're going to do for Magic Kingdom is going to be more like Tortuga vibes, and you're going to have more of like the fun, silly pirates as an extension of the ride in the theme park. This feels a little bit more high end, and I love the detail because the bar looks pretty plain and simple. The furnishings are really nice, but if you look up, the ceiling has a map on it, and I thought that that was just such a really cool touch that they put in there. So I'm certainly excited. And Fort Lauderdale, that would be very easy for us.
It would be easier going out of Port Canaveral, but yeah, Fort Lauderdale we could make work for sure. But yeah, very, very exciting. Thank you all so much for joining us this and every week on Monoreel Radio. Monoreel Radio will always be free, but there are many ways that you can help support the show. Please give us a rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. Join the conversation on social media on all major platforms at Monoreel Radio. Share your favorite episodes with family and friends who may enjoy them. And of course, book your next trip with Jackie. Links to everything can be found at monoreelradio.com. We all get one story. Make yours a magical one.
On behalf of Monoreel Radio, we'd like to thank you for joining us. We'll see you at the movies, the stuff dreams are made of.